piercing through the darkness with the radiant light of truth. This is the Alchemical Lantern. Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Wayne McRoy, broadcasting live this evening on Free World FM and also on Rockfin. Broadcasting tonight from my subterranean research library in the heart of Pennsylvania's back mountain. Tonight, we're going to look into the occult origins of Groundhog Day. Happy Groundhog Day, everyone. As you may or may not know, the groundhog did not see his shadow today, thus signifying only 6 more weeks of winter, according to the tradition. And I know it sounds really stupid, and it is kind of really stupid, but this actually has a lot deeper origins than what most people would think of. And certainly it feels like we've done this before, hasn't it? But all kidding aside, because I was, of course, referencing the Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day, where he repeats the same day over and over and over again. That's what it feels like sometimes these days for myself. I don't know about any else of you other folks out there. But certainly it feels that way. Repeating over and over the same things. But, of course, tonight we're going to delve a little deeper into the background because most people are unaware that this holiday, this celebration of Groundhog's Day that we have today, is based on a much older tradition, going back into Celtic traditions. So, as most of us know, on February 2nd, the groundhog emerges from hibernation, comes out of his den, and predicts whether winter will deliver more cold weather this year. If the groundhog sees his shadow, the story goes, he will return to his hibernation and cold weather will persist for another few weeks. If not, warm weather is around the corner. The groundhog is vernacular for the name of a ground squirrel, formerly known as Marmota monax. This animal also goes by other names, the terms woodchuck, marmot, land beaver, whistler, and even whistlepig, all refer to the same creature. Whatever the name, there's a strong belief that this little burrowing mammal predicts the weather and a specific connection to the second day of February. This Groundhog Day tradition is celebrated in many places in the United States and Canada, with an emphasis on tongue-in-cheek humor and ceremonious proclamations. It's best known among people whose ancestors spoke German, especially the Pennsylvania Dutch, and I'm going to pause for a moment there in this synopsis, just to point out, this is the area of the country I live in here in Pennsylvania, and I do have ancestors that were of Pennsylvania Dutch descent, and if you're not familiar with what Pennsylvania Dutch is, well, these were German-speaking people. This was German lineage, people with German lineage, not really Dutch, as you would think of. But this is a designation they were given. And a lot of this tradition ties back to that. So here in Pennsylvania, we have several famous groundhogs. The most famous of all is Punxsutawney Phil, who is the ceremonial groundhog who gets drug out every Groundhog Day to look around at all the bright spotlights around him and see if he sees his shadow. And how do they determine this or not? I don't know. It's hard to say. It all seems rather silly and nonsensical, but as we'll see, there's deeper tradition here. So, if you like folklore of holidays, you may be interested in knowing that Groundhog Day is related to 2 of the other holidays that have been written about extensively in the past, Halloween and May Day. Did you know that? Did you know Groundhog Day has a connection to Halloween and to May Day? May 1st, also known as Beltane, and Halloween, also known as Samhain, in the old Celtic traditions, and of course this goes right along with it. It's a little something called Imbolc, and you may have seen or heard this term, Imbolc, used. Seems to have had a kind of new interest spawned about it in recent years. There's a lot of people out there who claim to have what they would call pagan-type ideologies these days, witchcraft ideologies, Wicca, these kind of things, all these new agey type deals that have sprung up and seem to have been adopted by people in recent years trying to grasp hold of something further in the past. Most of them would term themselves something along the lines of being pagan in their delineation with this stuff and looking at these different traditions. But at any rate, we've seen a renewed interest in this. Imbolc. Imbolc, it's referred to. That's how it's spelled in the modern vernacular. But it does have connections to both Halloween and, of course, May Day, also known as Beltane. May 1st, a high holy satanic holiday, for those who are unfamiliar with that. But the roots of Groundhog Day can be traced to the same cycle of pre-Christian festivals that give us those two celebrations. In astronomical terms, these holidays were the cross-quarter days, those days that fall midway between a solstice and an equinox. Ah, there we go. So now we're learning a little something. You see, it always ties back to the sky clock here, folks, with a lot of these traditions and celebrations, and it's no different with Groundhog Day. These festivals were apparently celebrated throughout Europe by the various tribes we now refer to as Celts. And it's believed that they influenced the sense of time throughout all of Europe and the European colonies in America. The seasonal turning points in the Celtic year were immensely important communal festivals in prehistoric, pre-Christian times. Of these festivals, the dates have continued to be important down to the present time. The Celtic names for the four festivals were Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lugnasa. For the ancient Europeans, these days were so crucial and so embedded in their cultural sense of time that when the Western European peoples were Christianized, the new church, unable to root them out, baptized them into Christian holidays. And I'm going to pause for a second there, folks. So we have these four holidays that celebrate the halfway point between the solstice and the equinox. And this is exactly what all of these days delineate. It's a halfway point between the solstice and the equinox. So keep that in mind. These were always things that have been present throughout all time and culture. And they do tie back to the sky clock, once again. So we have these holidays that were celebrated by some of these ancient peoples. Well, they were Christianized, just like everything else. When Christianity took over the world here, in, well, of course, the figurative sense and the literal sense as well, in many ways, as has been seen with the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and of course the Vatican that picked up the pieces of the Roman Empire and carried on, just changing the name and the outer garment, but still carrying on as the Roman Empire. But it's all been Christianized. Much the same has been done with many other aspects of various cultures here as well. So we see that they became these Christian holidays. So May 1st became May Day, originally associated with the Virgin Mary and later a secular spring festival with a maypole, a May Queen, and other folkloric customs. August 1st became in Britain Lammas, or Loaf Mass Day, when the farmers' wives brought the first loaves of bread baked from the new harvest of grain to the church to be blessed. Since November 1st in the Celtic year was a day devoted to the dead, the church made it into All Saints' Day. But the people continued to celebrate the eve of the old holiday as Halloween, with its many harmless folkloric customs that have come all the way down to our day. February 1st extended into February 2nd, became Candlemas, and eventually Groundhog Day. All of these transitional days looked to the future, looked ahead to the next season, the coming 3-month period, and hence were weather-important days. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So all of these had some type of a vestige of relating importance to the coming future weather and the coming season. Even though these were halfway points through the various seasons, they were looking ahead to try to figure out what the weather patterns were going to be. And of course, this was important to early peoples who planned all of their lives around the harvest and around all these activities related to farming. These were some cultures who had this important attachment to nature. And they lived their life by these cycles of time, these seasons. And they planned accordingly. So they looked for the different indications as to how the upcoming season would be in order to help them along. So this is where many of these traditions come from. Now it sounds relatively harmless, doesn't it? Of course it does. But through the course of time, there have been some sinister attachments to many of these holidays, even though they were Christianized early on. And we'll see. We won't get ahead of ourselves here, but let's go ahead and we'll read on, because it's interesting as to what the actual roots of this whole celebration are. So here we sit at the midway point between winter and the dawn of spring. Winter's half gone, folks. That's good news. We are on the ascendant. We are rising towards new life, new celebration of life in the springtime. Good place to be. We're now officially on the ascendant. We're on the other side of the halfway point. It's Wednesday, right? It's essentially the Wednesday of the wintertime season. That's what Groundhog Day represents. But let's continue on here. All of these transitional days looked to the future, looked ahead to the next season, the coming 3-month period, and hence were weather-important days. In the Irish saga, The Wooing of Emer, which probably dates to the 11th century but recounts events set in pre-Christian Ireland, we find that the 4 days named by Yoder, an important writer about Irish and Celtic folklore here, were indeed the main reference points for the reckoning of time, to express the ideas that her suitor may be such a skilled warrior that he is safe at all times. Emir says that he must be able to, quote, go out in safety from Samhain to Imbolc, from Imbolc to Beltane, and again from Beltane to Bron Trogain or Lugnasa, end quote. So going to pause for a moment. So if you didn't catch that, these are these 4 holidays that mark the midway points between seasons. In the same story, the warrior Cuchulainn calls Imbolc the beginning of spring, and opines that the name derives from an ancient word for sheep, because Imbolc is the time when sheep come out and are milked. Thus, this saga shows that Imbolc was considered a seasonal turning point and a marker of time, and connected with the agrarian year, and particularly with animal husbandry. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this is an important distinction. This was a marking point in the year for those people who led a very agricultural type lifestyle, and their lives revolved around nature and the harvest and the planting and harvesting of food, and this kind of thing, was an important marking point in the natural year, the course of the natural year, the great year of the Lord, was a marking point. So this was something that was important. These were the things that they observed happening in nature at this time, and they were able to identify this as the unofficial start of spring. You see, we're halfway through. Like I said, we're on the ascendant again. So this is the important thing. Let's continue here, though. It says, unfortunately, we don't know that much else about how ancient Celts celebrated Imbolc, but its importance as the first day of spring persisted in living memory. In Ireland, where most of our information about the holiday comes from, the Encyclopedia of Irish Spirituality tells us, quote, the day remains an agricultural festival. Farmers expect good weather for planting on Imbolc, and fishermen traditionally overhauled their boats on this day. In traditional practice, there is divination to foretell the weather and family fortunes in the coming year, end quote. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. So divination and fortune-telling were practiced in many of these Celtic cultures on this day of Imbolc. So you can make your own assertions as to the nature of that. I don't think it sounds overly sinister in that regard when you're trying to predict future weather patterns. Is that a type of fortune telling too? Would you call a meteorologist a fortune teller? Or would you attach a negative connotation to a meteorologist? Isn't this the same kind of thing? Would you call them a fortune teller? I don't know. So there's this distinction to be made, and of course, we've been so indoctrinated in our modern ways of thinking, and especially those with religious ties. We've been taught to think of this kind of stuff as being evil or backwards or bad, not to go near it, not to touch it. And to a certain degree, that is true. I don't recommend doing any of these things, putting to practice any of these types of ideas like fortune telling and things that have these greater connotations of spiritual aspects to them. But predicting the weather and things like that, not necessarily a harmful thing. But this is what's been indoctrinated, especially into the religious denominations in our modern culture. So they would look at this and say, oh, that's bad, that's evil. And yet they don't bat an eyelash about Groundhog's Day because it's all in good fun, right? So you have to wonder, what's the purpose to all of that? Is there something more sinister, or is it just an ancient celebration that's looking at things happening in nature and making an educated guess based upon the things that have been observed? There's nothing wrong with doing that, is there? With observing and perhaps recording data about certain things. It's called pattern recognition, folks. Nothing mysterious about it. Let's continue, though. Of course, Imbolc now goes by many names. In the Christian calendar, it became the feast of the purification of the Virgin Mary and the presentation of Christ in the temple, and in the Irish Church in particular, it is celebrated as St. Bridget's Day. It is traditionally a day when people brought their candles to church to be blessed. So in English vernacular tradition, it is called Candlemas. And in French and Spanish, it's known as Chandelier or Candelaria. But the tradition of predicting the weather persisted through many of the holiday's variations. Versions of this Candlemas weather lore in English, Scots, and Latin have preserved both as simple statements of belief and practice, and as rhymes, a few of which were listed in the Oxford Dictionary of Proverbs. And it gives one of those rhymes here, but I don't dare read it because I'm going to butcher it, because I can't speak this type of Scottish type of a version of English that's given here. I will butcher it, certainly. So I'm not going to read that. I'll do you that favor and not read that little poem that it gives here. Weather prognostication then became associated with the beginning of February during ancient times, and the tradition persists until today. But this still leaves us in the dark as to the groundhog and his role in the process. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Okay, so it all makes sense up until this point. We had these traditional holidays wherein it aligns with the sky clock. It's the midpoint between a solstice and an equinox. And they've had different names for these things, and this one was referred to as Imbolc in the Celtic tradition. But how do we get to a groundhog from all of this? Well, let's get to that. Now, it seems this part of the tradition, too, comes from Europe. Specifically, it comes from parts of Europe that were Celtic in ancient times, but were later inhabited by Germanic speakers. Germans believed the weather was predicted by a badger rather than a groundhog, but the traditions are otherwise almost identical. The Handwörterbuch der deutschen Aberglaubens, or the Dictionary of German Folk Belief, has an article on Lichtmas or Candlemas. Above all, it says Candlemas is decisive for the weather of the coming time, and with it also for the fruitfulness of the year. This European encyclopedia also cites the Dachs, or the badger, as the Candlemas weather prophet throughout much of German-speaking Europe. Dachstag, or Badger Day, is a German folk expression for Candlemas. The belief was, if the badger encountered sunshine on Candlemas, and therefore saw his shadow, he crawled back into his hole to stay for 4 more weeks, which would be a continuation of winter weather. So we have here the badger. Much like the groundhog, is a small hibernating forest-dwelling mammal, known for being very shy, and it was only natural for German-speaking immigrants in America to substitute the groundhog for the badger, So there we go. It ties back to German tradition, to Celtic traditions that were adopted by Germanic-speaking peoples in Europe and ported over to this Candlemas celebration. And of course, it has to do with predicting the upcoming weather. So they used a badger. We don't need no stinking badgers. We have groundhogs here in America. So the first mention of groundhogs predicting the weather on February 2nd is in a diary entry for that day, which would be, I guess, February 2nd in 1840, written by a Welsh-American storekeeper in Pennsylvania. And it says, "Today the Germans say the groundhog comes out of his winter quarters, and if he sees his shadow, he returns in and remains there 40 days. So that was what the original entry is, and that's the very first entry we have about the celebration of Groundhog Day here in America. That was dated to 1840. So interesting. This is a more modernized type of a celebration of this old traditional Imbolc. So we see here the general belief of the Germans, the German neighbors in the area. It doesn't appear to be limited to a single family or town, nor does it seem to be a brand new belief. Since the belief and practice almost certainly came from Europe, and since the bulk of Pennsylvania Dutch immigration occurred between 1727 and 1775, it's likely Groundhog Day was born in that period. So I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So it probably dates back to between the 1720s and the 1770s, sometime here in America. But of course, we don't really see anything written down about it until 1840. And that's just the written records that we have that have survived through that course of time here. But as you see, it's got much older roots than that. The beliefs and practices of Groundhog Day have led to a fascinating development in Pennsylvania Dutch country. The Groundhog Lodges, a loose organization of social clubs focused on the maintenance of Pennsylvania Dutch language and culture. The lodges, which hold meetings called Versamelingi, at which participants speak only Pennsylvania Dutch, have existed since the 1930s. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. If you're not familiar at all with Pennsylvania Dutch, it's a strange type of a way of speaking. It's like a mixture between various English words and various German words. It's a mishmash of languages, and it's completely unique. It's much like the cant of the gypsies, if you've heard of that kind of a thing. And I think there's a bit of importance, linguistic importance, to this Pennsylvania Dutch, as it's called. I think there's some very real ties back to the same type of ideology as the language of the gypsies, the cant of the gypsies. They're not speaking a totally foreign language to you, but they're using words you're not familiar with and terms you're not familiar with. That's essentially what it is. It's like a mishmash of German and English hodgepodged together into this weird amalgamation. And it has its own type of local vernacular here in Pennsylvania. And there's certain terms that we use here in Pennsylvania that don't mean the same thing as they do elsewhere because of this Pennsylvania Dutch. It's permeated throughout all of the culture of the state here. It's an interesting little aside for anybody who's not from around here and doesn't understand, perhaps, where some of these ideas come from. Well, it ties back to this Pennsylvania Dutch. And it's a different kind of language altogether. And of course, we had these organizations, Groundhog Lodges, they're called here. This was something I was totally unaware of, but I'm not surprised by. It's almost like a secret society. Nothing really secret about it, but it's a society that was put together to keep this vernacular in the modern language, and these were formed around the 1930s, according to this. Let's read on and see what else we can find here, because it's a different kind of culture. There's a whole cultural element to this. In his 2016 book, Serious Nonsense, William W. Donner describes his first Versameling in the 1990s. There were 300 or 400 men in the hall. At the front were a decorated stage and an 8-foot statue of a groundhog wearing a crown. At the beginning of the meeting, everyone stood reverently as men in top hats carried in a stuffed groundhog and placed it in front of the speaker's podium. They pledged allegiance to the American flag, sang America, and then listened to a prayer, all in the Pennsylvania German Deutsch language. They raised both hands as pause and took an oath of allegiance to the lodge and the groundhog. They listened to a weather report, piped into the speaker system about whether or not the groundhog saw his shadow. They ate a hearty meal. They sang songs. They watched a humorous skit about a lecherous doctor who cured people by transferring their ailments to his assistant. And they listened to an inspirational talk sprinkled with humor about the values of Pennsylvania German life. Anyone who spoke English, especially from the podium, was charged a fine for each word. And that's the end of the account given in this book. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. So, of course, we have some of the hallmarks of a secret society type meeting, don't we? In this kind of an organization. And these people take this stuff very seriously. It's kind of like a secret society. It might be some kind of a spin-off of another secret society group, if you want to look at it in that regard. But a lot of this is to keep this tradition alive. Now, this continues, and it says, there's much more information about the lodges and their activity in Donner's book if you want to seek out a versamling for a Pennsylvania German experience. And it says, I'll mention here that Pennsylvania Dutch and Pennsylvania German mean the same thing. But, of course, there's some that prefer one over the other, and it's a lot of people that come from outside this area that would refer to it more properly as Pennsylvania German. Because it is German, it's not Dutch. But I think there's an interesting connotation attached to that as well, with the Dutch aspect to it. But anyway, that's a subject for another time, and maybe we'll explore a little bit of that avenue of thought at a later date here. But this is where it comes from. And you can see some of these occultic type ties to this. You see how they've turned the whole celebration into this kind of grandstanding mockery of something that would be considered sacred. It's about the sacred and the profane, and by the way, that's the title of a book that you should pick up and read, The Sacred and the Profane. And we see a lot of this done within many of these secret society groups. They mock the sacred, and of course this is the same thing that has gone on in the past, and the same thing that I have pointed out ad nauseum for a great deal of time now about the celebration of January 6th. You see, it's known as the Feast of Epiphany in the modern Christian church. But in the Middle Ages, they celebrated something called the Feast of Fools, which was a direct mockery of the powers that be in the church and in the state. And this was something that was reinvoked on January 6th during that whole agenda and debacle that went down there. The world's worst insurrection, if you want to call it that, with tour guides available. So anyway, it was all a show, folks. It was all the Feast of Fools. And if you want to have a little better quick idea of what the Feast of Fools is, go back and watch the Disney movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and look for the song Topsy Turvy in there, where they depict this on screen, the Feast of Fools, as a precursor of things to come. And we're living in clown world now. We've been indoctrinated into clown world. You see, they crowned the mock pope. That was part of the Feast of Fools during that time. And it's the same kind of thing. So we see in all of these different traditions and these different types of groups like this, we see mockery going on. So they're taking something that had a sacred connotation to it, this celebration of the midpoint between the equinox and the solstice, and the tradition to look for the signs in nature to see what kind of season you would have upcoming, what the weather was going to be. And they turned it into a mockery, and they crowned a rodent, essentially, as the object here of focus. So it's a type of mockery, in a sense. And this is where it comes from. And feel free to disagree with me on that. A lot of people think it's all in good fun, and maybe it is all in good fun. Maybe it is harmless. I don't know. But it seems to me they've taken an idea that was one time held sacred, and they've turned it into a total mockery. And aren't they doing that with all things sacred these days? There's no respect anymore for the spiritual, sacred things. It's all been turned on its head. It's been inverted. It's the inversion process at play here. And of course, we've been indoctrinated into clown world, but now we're looking for this future season here that was celebrated in these festivals like Imbolc and have been ported over into the modern era into what we now know as Groundhog Day. And of course, they made a mockery out of that as well with the Bill Murray movie, didn't they? Groundhog Day. So now we all associate that movie with it as well. And it's kind of poking fun at life in general, isn't it? Poking fun at time. The notion of time, the passage of time, and what our lot is in life. But at any rate, let's get back to this. So if you're not Pennsylvania Dutch or Pennsylvania German, you may feel like celebrating Groundhog Day without attending a long meeting or paying a fine for speaking English. One option, of course, is to attend a Groundhog Day celebration. Because of their association with a hibernating woodchuck, many such events are held outdoors, so you won't be in a large indoor gathering. But we still urge you to take pandemic precautions and wear a mask. I apologize for that, folks. I find it funny that that was included in this article, because this article was written back in 2022, and of course, they have to get their fear porn in there, don't they? Wear a mask outside, how retarded, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's go watch the Groundhog celebration, but make sure we're outdoors wearing a mask. That's retarded. But let's get back to it. The best-known Groundhog Day ceremony occurs each year in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. This annual festival traces its origin to 1887, when members of the local Elks Lodge first went to nearby Gobbler's Knob to consult a groundhog about the weather. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. If you're not from Pennsylvania, we got some doozy names for town, and Gobbler's Knob is one of them. There's also Intercourse, PA, not far from there, and Blue Ball, PA. I'm not kidding. We have all this stuff here in Pennsylvania. But that's a story for another day. You want to talk about mockery. But anyway, so that being aside, sorry, I had to chuckle. I turned into Beavis there for a minute. Hey, butthead. The observance developed in an annual tongue-in-cheek ceremony, at which the groundhog, given the name Punxsutawney Phil in the 1960s, communicates his prediction to the Inner Circle, a group of men wearing formal suits and top hats. Though it's only one of many Groundhog Day ceremonies held all across the United States and Canada, the Punxsutawney event is certainly the most popular, especially since it became the basis of the renowned philosophical comedy film Groundhog Day, which the Library of Congress inducted into the National Film Registry in 2015. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. And that should tell you a little something about the film. It's been inducted into the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress. So there's some important prominence to this. And of course, we see the tells of a secret society being involved in some of the ceremonials here. Because you see, the groundhog gives his prediction to the Inner Circle. So even if it is intended as a mockery or to poke fun at known things about maybe some of these secret society groups, it still has that ever-presence of occultism attached to it, secrecy, and of course it's making the sacred into the profane, as we see here. If you live near us in Washington, D.C., you may be happy to know that we have our own local Groundhog Day observance at the DuPont Circle Fountain. Modeled on the Punxsutawney event, this one features Potomac Phil, a stuffed groundhog who magically communicates his predictions to an inner circle of people in top hats. Unlike his Punxsutawney relative, Potomac Phil makes predictions about both the physical and the political climate. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this is something centralized close to Washington, D.C., of course. Potomac Phil, it's a stuffed groundhog, not even a live one, but somehow it makes political predictions, too. No, there's not anything nefarious going on with any of this, right? To the inner circle of these people in top hats. Of course, they're dressed in top hats. Maybe one day I'll go into the symbolism of a top hat, the occult significance of a top hat, and various other types of hats as well. That might be an interesting show for one day, but not for tonight. Let's continue on here. So Potomac Phil makes predictions about the physical and the political climate. In 2021, for example, he predicted both an early spring and a continued political gridlock. We'll let you judge how accurate he was. Of course, if you don't live near a Groundhog Day ceremony and you don't want to travel, you can always watch the film Groundhog Day, or you can read the two books mentioned in this article here, which are Groundhog Day by Don Yoder, and, of course, William Donner's Serious Nonsense that we quoted from about the Pennsylvania Dutch ceremony earlier. And it says here, if you have kids, there are a lot of children's books about Groundhog Day. If you're feeling very committed, you can cook and eat a groundhog. There's many recipes for such things, and actually I think I've had woodchuck in the past. My grandfather used to cook everything and anything. He made a lot of really good food. He was an Italian gentleman. And his cooking was really fantastic. But he would cook all kinds of things and feed them to us without us knowing what it was and only tell us afterwards what we ate. And I'm pretty sure I've eaten woodchuck, and it's not bad, really. Little gamey, but that's what you get with gamey type animals like that. But nevertheless, there's recipes for that. And it's giving that, it's saying if you want to get really committed to celebrating Groundhog Day, you could do that if you want. I think that's kind of not necessary. But anyway, it says another way to celebrate, and one particularly recommended, is to sing or listen to groundhog songs. I guess there's a lot of songs that are associated with this, probably going back once again to the Pennsylvania Dutch. And of course, there's parodies of carols sung to the well-known German anthem, Today the Groundhog Comes, and it's sung to John Brown's Body, and Punxsutawney Phil Looked Out, sung to the tune of Good King Wenceslas. And of course, there's a whole book about Groundhog Day carols, it says here. This article, by the way, is from the Library of Congress, folks. So it seems to be promoting some of the other articles it has available in the Library of Congress. And of course, they had to put their fear porn, mask-wearing nonsense in there as well. But it's an interesting place to find information. There's a lot there that you can find about things like this. And it says, well, these song parodies constitute a vibrant tradition in their own right. The American Folklife Center's archive can offer some older and less self-conscious groundhog songs. In particular, we have two available online. The well-known fiddle tune and banjo song just called Groundhog, and a blues song called Prowling Groundhog. I didn't know there was so much culture devoted to groundhogs, folks, but apparently there is. And I guess this holiday has a lot more significance to people today than what I would ever figure. Because there's even blues bands that have written songs about groundhogs. So that's interesting. But anyway, these are just a couple of the glimpses into the traditions of Groundhog's Day. And of course, it draws from way back to the celebration of Imbolc. And of course, this connection to the sky clock. Always involved with this is some type of an astrological event with many of these holidays. And of course, this is important to keep in mind because this is how we measure our seasons and know where we are in a space of time. Now, through the years and millennia, our calendar has gotten jacked, let's be honest. It's been jacked. And we're not sure where we are in the grand scheme of things as per the times or the seasons in a greater sense. But we can know a little something in the microcosm of the year and know where we are. And as we sit right now at this halfway point between winter and the start of spring, we are on the ascendant, and that's an important place to be. And I think also, if you want to look at it on a grander scale, I think we are also on the ascendant in the greater cycles of time. I think we've been through the low point now over the course of the past couple of years, and now we're making a comeback. I'm extremely optimistic about this, and I do see a lot of the nefarious schemes and stuff going on in the world around us, and I do see how they're running roughshod, trying to double down and triple down on all of these different agendas that they've put out through the years. And they're going for it. They're trying to lock down total control measures everywhere in this world. They're trying to actually pass something right now where the World Economic Forum is trying to leverage different nations into signing a treaty with the World Health Organization, giving them carte blanche control over things in the event of a health emergency. This is a dastardly plan and needs to be put a stop to. The freedoms of humanity may hang into balance with that kind of thing going on. And of course, these are all unelected officials trying to make this happen. These are not people representing your best interests or my own. They think they're doing things for the greater good, but they most certainly are not. Something like that would be catastrophic. Catastrophic for those of us who still value our human freedoms and rights. And although this kind of thing is being pushed, and they're doing everything in their power to leverage the energies of the time and the cycle in their favor, I think, I have a strong feeling they're going to fail, because try as they might, they cannot stop an idea whose time has come. There is no stopping such a thing, and we are on the precipice of a great awakening here of sorts. And I hear people talk about it all the time, and this great awakening idea has been misconstrued massively by a lot of people. What's going on, essentially, we're living through a time of revelation. The veils being torn away from in front of our eyes, ladies and gentlemen. All the things that have been done in the dark, in the darkness, in the past, are now seeing the light of day. They're being done openly. The problem is, so many people have become so indoctrinated into complacency and this go-along to get-along attitude that they've come to accept this encroachment upon their personal spiritual freedoms. They've come to accept living with this kind of a thing. And that's not where we need to be. And we're seeing people begin to shake out of their slumber as these things are seeing the light of day more and more. But of course, the problem is these dark occultists at the top of the power structure that run things in this world, they're the ones that steer media agendas. Media, all forms of media, they control very likely about 98% of all forms of media. They have some type of direct connection or control of. And any voices that speak something counter to what they want out there, well, they can silence them. There's censorship going on. It's a very real thing. Shadow banning's a very real thing. I encounter it all the time myself. Seems like if you're not talking about something of importance, you could talk about whatever you want and have all kinds of eyes and ears watching and listening. But if you try to talk about important things, important topics, you get very few eyes watching and very few ears actually listening. And that's all by design. You see, they've used algorithms to filter this stuff out. So people who are legitimately interested in tuning into a show or a program like this one to listen will very likely never hear this show because they're not even aware it exists. Because it doesn't get the push from the algorithms like these other things do. Doesn't wind up in their suggestions. Even though they know they would like something like this, doesn't turn up there. Isn't that interesting? And that's always the way with a lot of this stuff. This has been going on for a very long time, and this is just a symptom of the times we're in because they know that there's a large group of people, a large mass of people out there that are seeing through the lies and manipulations now. And they're actively searching for this type of information. They're searching for this type of an outlet. You see, that's why I'm here on Free World FM, ladies and gentlemen. It is one of the last bastions of free speech that we have. We know this. This is one of the last platforms we have where we can speak freely and openly and have adult conversations about things that matter. And I would really like to see this station succeed and go worldwide. It's already broadcasting worldwide. We just don't have a massive amount of listenership yet because people just haven't gotten the word that there is this station. And we're having growing pains right now. We're having growing pains. We're working through different problems we're encountering. You see, we're all just a group of people that wanted to get together and have a platform where we could speak freely and we could put content out there for people to listen to freely without the fear of censorship or without the fear of backlash. And we're doing our very best to make that happen. You see, none of us were really radio professionals or communication specialists or anything of the sort. We're just a group of people that want to do what's right. And primarily, this whole project, this radio station, Free World FM, is primarily funded by one Mr. Tony Arterburn, to whom I have a great deal of respect. This is a guy who has integrity. This is a guy who just wants to do right. He doesn't want to see the world and this country that he loves go down the toilet, down the tubes. And he's doing things to try to make a difference. And it's these type of people that we need to support. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here. He's doing the right thing because he's standing in his integrity. Now, there are other people involved in this project trying to get it off the ground, too. And to each of them, we also want to give recognition and respect. And give them their just dues for this. These are all people who want the same thing. They want to be able to have free speech remain an innate human right where we can speak our minds, we can express ideas, we can communicate, we can talk about ideas, and maybe foster some solutions to some of our problems. Maybe point out inconsistencies and lies and corruption where we see it. Using all the tools that we have available to us to do so. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here broadcasting on this platform. Now, the audience isn't massive as of yet. But like I said, we're having growing pains. And I think we are making some headway. And we want to do this because we want to ensure that there is some place you can go and hear some hard truths. A lot of that's going away in the mainstream culture. You don't hear truth on mainstream news anymore, mainstream media. You're handed a script. You're handed a political spin, tailor-made to your particular tastes. You're not given any hard facts. Journalism is a dead entity, folks. There's no such thing as true journalism anymore. If there is, it's only in small pockets of people out there reaching out on independent platforms, just trying to make some headway. It's kind of a grassroots type thing, and there are some platforms out there where people are able to make a little bit of leeway with this stuff. Like I said, this Free World FM, good place to go to find truthful information, to find people who are concerned and have integrity and want a better future for all of us, and want to discuss ideas. You have platforms like Rockfin, also, on which I'm transmitting and broadcasting right now, that carry this. They've been excellent as far as not censoring people. But of course, these pale in comparison to some of the larger broadcast media platforms out there. Things like YouTube, which is heavily censored and controlled, heavily shadow banned. I'm heavily shadow banned on YouTube. Heavily shadow banned. For as long as I've been on YouTube, the traffic I get on there is a mere fraction of what it should be based upon similar time frames and similar types of efforts put forward by other people on YouTube. Doesn't make sense. The algorithms are cued against us in this regard. But we need to carry on, and we need to find new ways to reach people. And another platform I strongly support is Substack. If you haven't heard of Substack, go over to substack.com. It's a very interesting platform. They're adding all kinds of features to it all the time. All kinds of tools on there. It's almost like another social media type platform. You can find newsletters and blogs, videos, podcasts, everything of the sort over there. It's another place where the freedom of expression is maintained for now. Where you have freedom of speech without the fear of censorship, and you have this culture of people being able to freely express their ideas in an open manner without fear of backlash or reprisal or demonetization or shutting down your platform, your channel, your access thereof. So there's a few of these places that still exist, and there's a few people doing these things for the right reasons, setting up these types of platforms, but I'll tell you what, they're struggling. A lot of them are struggling to compete with the juggernauts out there that are the YouTubes and the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world, and now Twitter's called X, and that should tell you everything you need to know about that. I've actually done a breakdown on Twitter in the past, and the occult connotations to that and stuff as well. But you get Elon Musk involved, and of course it's bound to go down the toilet. He's just another controlled figurehead trying to lead the opposition to the same eventual ends as the rest. It's just your flavor that you like given to you. That's how they control the masses. They split you into two groups. They give you two ideologies you can follow, and you pick a side, and you remain on that side, and you only listen and watch the things that reinforce your beliefs, your pre-existing beliefs, rather than try to come to terms with what may or may not be true. There's no open discussion there. They just give it this political spin to make it attractive to one audience or the other. And all this does is create more infighting between people, create more animosity between people. It's the same formula that they used for Fox News, which has turned into a total joke as to compared to what it used to be. It used to be the right-wing channel, didn't it? It gave you the right-wing political ideology, whereas all the others give you the leftist ideology. And now we have a similar thing going on with alternative media. Many of the alternative media platforms out there and channels that have become so popular and very close to being mainstream. This is all the same type of thing going on. It's all the same type of thing, and this is what we're trying to fight against. Any of us out there that really want to make some headway here and try to explore ideas, talk about solutions to problems. Those of us trying to do that, we get backlash from both sides, from the mainstream press, which is very left-wing leaning, and also from this controlled portion of the alternative media, which has become essentially the new Fox News. That's what it is, folks. It all began when InfoWars and Alex Jones started supporting Trump and backing Trump. That was all a project put forth by Cambridge Analytica, folks, using your data against you. They knew what talking points would get your attention, and they knew if they presented Trump as an outsider who knew about all these different types of conspiracies and the conspiratorial talk that goes on with this, and pointed these things out and called them out publicly, that people would back him and support him. And that they could get a lot of these right-wingers who felt very much ostracized at that point involved in this. It was a work. We were worked. The public was worked. And we still see some portion of that going on today with the Q nonsense and Q agenda still backing this up. And once again, here we are, repeating history. We are reliving this Groundhog Day mentality. If you look at the Bill Murray movie, again, we have the same election coming up. It's going to be Biden and Trump again. Why? Can't we do any better than a couple dawdling old men who are a bunch of pervs and child molesters? Alleged child molesters, I should say. I shouldn't make a gross accusation like this without any evidence. But we'll say there are people who claim that they are. And this should be concerning. Why would you want to elect somebody to the highest office in the land who might have some type of connection to that type of thing, and to human trafficking, and to all sorts of other heinous things? And both of these guys have had involvement in that kind of stuff. Both of them. And it continues to go on. And it's an abuse of power, an abuse of privilege, corruption in the highest, most places in the land, and yet this is what we're reliving. Really? Why? Why are there no better options? Well, because it's all controlled and it's contrived, and all the world is a stage, and we've been through this before. Told you these things time and again. Cover this stuff all the time. The world's a stage. But here we are, repeating the same cycle again. And of course, all these things tie to the cycles of time and the sky clock. And these dark occultists who run things in this world, they have a better understanding of that than us. These natural energies that are inherent in these different times and cycles. Why do you think they hold elections at certain times? Why do you think the primary elections are this time of year, still on the backside of Groundhog Day, still in the beginning phases of winter when we're not on the ascendant yet? They do this stuff on purpose. They understand these energetic principles and they leverage them against us. And here we are, reliving it again. Happy Groundhog's Day, everybody. That's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next week here on the Alchemical Lantern. Have a good one.